Oswaldo Baptista Fadda, from Rio de Janeiro, born on January 8, 1920, in the suburb of Rio de Janeiro in the neighborhood of Bento Ribeiro, of Italian descent, son of João Baptista Fadda and Adelina Josefina Batista Fadda. Oswaldo Fadda had brothers Umberto Fadda and Guilherme Fadda. They grew up under a very strict, disciplinary education and genuinely connected to serving society as an example of citizenship and family pride. We highlight that Fadda's father, Mr. João Baptista, acted as a local public security officer in the Bento Ribeiro region. He was a surveillance police officer who took care of the well-being of all residents and visitors to the neighborhood. At that time, community policing was very common and police officers were part of the lives of local families. Due to this inheritance, the whole family was very dear, and Oswaldo Fadda and his brothers stood out for reflecting the characteristics of their father, as they were generous men and known for being attentive, modest, solidary and communicative. The story of Oswaldo Fadda has martial arts as its landmark. Fadda was the first to start jiu-jitsu without being a Gracie in the region. He was a pioneer of the art in the poorest regions of Rio de Janeiro and surroundings, highlighting the suburbs, North Zone, West and interior of the state. Following the example of family generosity and care for the popular people inherited by his father, soon after discovering jiu-jitsu in the armed forces, the young Fadda became known for starting teaching free of charge to humbler people who did not have the financial conditions to practice the inaccessible jiu-jitsu. Its practice was the monopoly of the select Gracie family at that time, 1940s, in the noblest region of the city, South Zone and downtown. Fadda's first students were his older brother Umberto Fadda, and with his friend, former World War II combatant Alexander de Souza Neves, Chandu. In the history of the Fadda Academy, Chandu was the noblest student of Fadda. It was the first and only red belt grandmaster formed by Oswaldo Fadda when he was still alive. Before his history with jiu-jitsu, Fadda's first steps in the world of fights were in the noble art, that is, in boxing, through champion Baltazar Cardoso. Jiu-jitsu, judo, among other Japanese fights were not widely known in Brazil, and the most accessible fighting options were just capoeira or boxing. Oswaldo Fadda in 1938, around the age of 17, when he joined the Brazilian Marines Corps of the Navy, in the Saint José Fortress, Snake Island, Rio de Janeiro, he began his military training in personal defense, later coming to know that were based on Japanese jiu-jitsu that had previously been disseminated and implemented at the initiative of the Brazilian military in 1908. Through renowned Japanese professors, we highlight the influence of Mitsuyo Maeda, Takeo Yano, Sada Miyako, among others who worked in the Navy. Upon joining the Navy as a Brazilian Marine, Fadda met Master Luiz de Franca, who was also trained under the guidance of Mitsuyo Maeda and also influenced by the history of the Japanese who had been in the Brazilian Navy before. Sada Miyako, first jiu-jitsu teacher in the Brazil, 1908, and later directly Takeo Yano, 1936, who is also cited as a fight instructor in the Brazilian Navy. Yano was probably a participant in the history of the construction of military jiu-jitsu by Luiz de Franca. There were also many other Japanese and martial arts practitioners that Luiz de Franca sought to meet and train. Franca was the most influential disseminator of fighting arts for military combat, in particular, jiu-jitsu in the Brazilian Marines Corps of Navy, developing the practice of hand-to-hand combat fights and jiu-jitsu among the elite of the Marines. The combat classes for defense and attack in war situations had been passed on in the military environment in France, corroborating the knowledge acquired with other Japanese and practitioners who preceded him in another era. Luiz de Franca improved the military system to practice in his daily life routine. With great knowledge and experience previously obtained, the military fight instructor Luiz de Franca Filho visited great academies, including the famous Hélio Gracie Academy, sometimes being invited to be part of the team at events, since only the Gracie Academy exclusively represented the jiu-jitsu. This fact made even some practitioners think that Franca was a Gracie student. In fact, when Franca arrived at the Gracie Academy, he already had a vast knowledge of jiu-jitsu, and was only looking for places to train jiu-jitsu. However, this never made Luiz de Franca a student of the Gracie Academy, but rather a collaborator, as Luiz de Franca was not a member of a formal academy. Fighter Franca was invited by the only Jiu-Jitsu academy at the time to defend the banner and name of Jiu-Jitsu against other challenging martial arts. He was even mistakenly quoted in one of the newspapers by student Dupont Saraiva in an attempt to give credibility to his graduation, writing that Luis de Franca was the best athlete at the Gracie Academy, referring to the disputes that Franca represented Jiu-Jitsu with great prominence and performance. Franca, in addition to training several other fights, including boxing and wrestling, very popular at the time, acquired experiences that improved his style and highlighted him in all places that had combat sports. Such interaction complemented the entire pedagogical system that would be taught to his student Oswaldo Fadda. Master Luis de Franca followed the example of Mitsuyo Maeda, who also learned other styles. Franca continued his journey of studies with his disciples, giving rise to the differentiated system of Jiu-Jitsu through Oswaldo Fadda.